of this shocking video out of Arizona, vividly depicting the moment 3 police officers are struck by a fast-moving car in an incident that's now being described as a, quote, violent, intentional act. Now there is new information about the man in the driver's seat who is facing attempted murder charges tonight. Trace Gallagher has the story in our West Coast newsroom. Trace?
Megan, the Phoenix police chief says not only was it violent and intentional, it was unprovoked, and the video appears to back him up. It's just after 1 o'clock in the morning. Police say the surveillance camera on the top right-hand side of the screen shows the suspect, 44-year-old Mark Laquan Payne, an African-American male, pull his Nissan Altima up near the gas pump of a Phoenix convenience store. On the bottom right-hand side of the screen, you see his headlights are shining directly on 3 Phoenix police officers, including a rookie on his first day. The officers are in uniform, standing near a patrol car in a very well-lit area. Then you can see the man in the Nissan backs his car into a parking spot and then turns off the lights. Several minutes then go by before the suspect pulls out of the parking spot, turns on his lights, goes around the gas pump, and watch this, goes directly at the police officers. The rookie officer was thrown up into the air. You see him go into the store window. Another suffered a broken leg. The third officer jumped out of the way. The suspect then tries to fight the officers, but amazingly, the rookie and the sergeant who jumped out of the way were able to get up, tase, and subdue the man. And the chief says they were clearly targeted. Listen.
It's unacceptable. I've been in law enforcement for over 30 years, and I've seen a lot of things, but I have never seen so many senseless, violent acts targeting law enforcement.
And tonight, the Kelly file has confirmed the suspect was convicted of 3 counts of aggravated assault back in 1997 and is now facing 3 counts of attempted murder, and we are investigating his connection to other groups. Megan.
Trace, thank you.
To the index tonight in the big rig police chase across the California desert. The driver of a stolen tractor trailer this morning leading police in a high-speed chase along several freeways in Riverside County. It lasted for hours. The truck belonging to a company that specializes in disposing hazardous material. The driver ultimately pulling over and surrendering after about 3 hours. Authorities saying that he told them he didn't want to go back to jail. A company spokesman says nothing dangerous was on board. A new trial for one of the country's most notorious murder cases. 6-year-old Eitan Pates kidnapped and killed in New York City in 1979. He was one of the first faces of missing children to be placed on a milk carton. His body was never found. Jury selection underway now for the retrial of Pedro Hernandez. He confessed in 2012, but the defense claims he is mentally ill. The judge telling jurors the trial could last until the end of January. A close call tonight at a remote airport overseas. The Boeing 737 skidding half a mile down the runway in Indonesia. The plane landing with only some of its landing gear inside the plane full of cargo fuel. Part of the back landing gear collapsed. No one was injured.
A U.S.-Russia brokered ceasefire came into force in Syria on Monday. Syrians are taking advantage of the situation to go out without fearing militant mortar attacks. But in some areas, the ceasefire didn't hold too long. Armed groups attacked the Syrian army positions around Aleppo and Homs just hours after the deal went into effect, raising fears that the truce would once again collapse.
I don't believe the US and Russia will be able to maintain the ceasefire. There are many sides involved in the situation in Syria, and some states are not happy about it, mainly Saudi Arabia, Qatar and France, because some are still insisting on military solutions in Syria. Militants also use the ceasefire time to regroup.
The Syrian army vowed to respect the regime of calm, but stressed will respond strongly to any violations. If the ceasefire holds for a week, both Russia and the U.S. say they will establish a joint operation room to coordinate airstrikes against Daesh and Jabhat Fath al-Sham terrorist groups.
I'm confident that the US is not serious about fighting terrorism, but in fact is seeking to strengthen militant groups to fill the gap of those terrorists that may be forced to flee Syria or get eliminated by the Syrian army.
Maintaining a ceasefire is not an easy task on the ground. Ahrar al-Sham terrorists who fight alongside Jabhat Fath al-Sham have already rejected the cessation of hostilities. There are many other terrorist factions like Noordin al-Zinki and Faylaq al-Sham that are not happy about the deal. Eventually putting an end to terrorists' presence in Syria depends on a serious will by all sides. What is even more important is an international consensus on a definition as to who a terrorist is and who is not. This helps the anti-terror efforts to be unified and more effective. Hamad Ali, Press TV.
The NTSB has determined the probable cause of a frightening accident at New York's LaGuardia Airport. We reported on it last year here, the Delta flight skidding off the runway when landing, stopping right at the edge of the water. New video shows passengers scrambling to get out as fuel was leaking from a wing. Tonight, investigators say a number of mistakes were made in what was a very close call. Here's ABC's David Curley.
This frightening scene at LaGuardia.
Tower, you have an aircraft off the runway.
It's a Delta jet nearly ending up in the bay after sliding off a snowy runway.
You said leaking fuel? His wing is ruptured.
And it was all preventable. For the first time tonight, we see the confusion inside.
We're going to have to evacuate the aircraft.
Passengers then told to wait.
They see that unless they're getting close.
It was 12 minutes before the evacuation starts over one wing exit because that other wing was leaking fuel. It took 17 minutes before all 127 people were off. It should have taken 90 seconds. Investigators say the cause was pilot error. Too much reverse thrust to slow the plane on the runway. The pilot losing the ability to keep the jet straight, and it starts sliding.
This was a very serious mishap that was really just feet from becoming something much more serious where people could have been killed.
Investigators say there was no urgency in the pilot's order for evacuation, and they add they believe that plane could have landed without incident in those conditions. David,
thank you.
Welcome back. It's now 1:15, and right now it is First on Fox. New warnings coming from Iran, with the rogue nation threatening to shoot down U.S. Navy spy planes in the Persian Gulf. This happened over the weekend, and now defense officials are telling Fox News that it involved these U.S. Navy surveillance aircraft, the P-8 Poseidon, you can see that one on the left, and the EP-3 Ares on the right. They were flying a reconnaissance mission in the Strait of Hormuz and also in the Gulf of Oman. and we're 13 miles off the coast of Iran, which is considered to be international waters. The threat to shoot down our planes, just the latest confrontation in that area with Iran's Navy harassing U.S. Navy warships in the Persian Gulf several times last month. Joining us now, Mark Duberwitz. He's Executive Director for the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Great to have you here with us. So tell me, why is Iran just continuing to badger the United States, and what are they getting out of it?
Heather, they're continuing to badger the United States because the Obama administration is not responding to these provocations. And in fact, since the nuclear deal, the administration has green-lighted tens of billions of dollars of cash to the regime to give them the money they need in order to increase their malign activities in the region. So provocations, no response. The Iranians have a dynamic that they like.
Well, the U.S. ships last week, when they came very, very close and forcing us to take some evasive measures, you know, there were some shots fired. And then this time with the planes, they said, hey, get your planes out of our area, even though we were in international waters, or we'll shoot. And we stayed on course. So our reaction is a little bit different now. Is that changing the equation?
Well, you know, Heather, again, the Iranians have taken U.S. Navy sailors at gunpoint. They've threatened our ships. They're threatening our planes. They're test-firing missiles capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. They're taking U.S. citizens as hostage, and they're continuing support for terrorism. So those are provocative actions, and, you know, rhetorically we may be getting tougher, but we're doing nothing to push back against these activities, and until the next president does so, the Iranians are going to continue. So
do you think we'll just see this between now and the time that the next president takes office?
I think the Obama administration ceded this long ago in signing a faulty nuclear deal and giving the Iranians billions of dollars, and in not keeping to the commitment they made to Congress to use, at a minimum, non-nuclear sanctions to push back against Iranian aggression. They've ceded this and created a terrible dynamic for the next president.
But do you think that they actually want to provoke us into some sort of action? Because this can only happen so many times before something could eventually occur.
Well, the Iranians are testing our will, and they're trying to see whether we actually have any red lines. And yes, they will continue to test us as they have for decades. This is part of the Iranian MO, and they believe they can continue to act provocatively, and the United States will do, quote-unquote, not a damn thing in response. Those aren't my words. That's the word of former Supreme Leader Khamenei.
All right. One official told Fox News, as we were reporting this, that the incident over the weekend was considered not to be unsafe, and that there were no missile launchers in the area. That's why it was not unsafe, and then just called it unprofessional. Your reaction to that?
Well, they're trying to be measured, obviously, and tempered in their response. But the Iranians have actually just gotten something called the S-300, which is a sophisticated air defense system from the Russians. They've put that around their Fordo nuclear facility. And that also has offensive capabilities. It allows them to surveil our planes in the Gulf. So they're going to get more aggressive and more sophisticated as they get even better technology. And I'm concerned about what the future holds.
All right, Mark Duberwitz, we have to leave it there. Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thanks so much. We'll see you again real soon.
With heavy hearts, they come together to honor Officer Tim King, killed in the line of duty. They came to what was originally scheduled as a prayer vigil. They also prayed for other officers who continue to protect and to serve despite these painful circumstances. This is the all-out manhunt continues for the suspect, Irving Finner, who investigators say killed Brackeen as a 13-year veteran officer tried to arrest him.
How sweet the sound. I never thought this would happen here. This is time to pray.
Then they all, officers, civilians, children, pastors, everyone, broke off into groups and prayed together, somehow trying to make sense with something that makes no sense at all.
Was blind, but now I see.
This is AP News Minute. Donald Trump's running mate Governor Mike Pence is standing by his refusal to describe white supremacist David Duke as deplorable. Pence was asked whether he wanted to amend an earlier statement in which he denounced Duke, but declined to call him deplorable. Hillary Clinton had used the term baskets of deplorables to describe half of Trump's supporters. Meanwhile, President Obama stumped for Hillary Clinton in Philadelphia, where he mounted a vigorous defense in her campaign's transparency and her fitness for the presidency. Obama called the Democratic nominee, quote, steady and true. Cat lovers in need of a pick-me-up may start gravitating toward London's Clapham Common tube station. All of the station's usual ads have been taken down, replaced by 68 oversized portraits of cats. The crowd-funded venture features stray cats from 2 rescue charities. And an Italian land artist has used his art to send his greetings to Hillary Clinton. Dario Gambarin used his tractor to plow out a huge work of art depicting Clinton together with the slogan, "You must, you can." The unique portrait took about 8 hours to create. Emily Roseman, Associated Press with AP
Well,
News
the
Minute.
ceasefire in Syria tonight appears to be holding. More than 300,000 people have died in 5.5 years of civil war. But under this deal worked out by the U.S. and Russia, the Assad regime has stopped bombing rebel forces and is due to allow humanitarian aid into Aleppo, once Syria's largest city, now a city in ruins. Elizabeth Palmer reports tonight from inside Syria.
Only a trickle of aid from Turkey made its way into northern Syria today, where civilians who've been through hell are waiting, desperate for food and medicine. For months, they've been sitting ducks for airstrikes by Syrian and Russian planes, or living under fire from opposition rockets. But what a difference a day makes. The ceasefire held, even in rebel-controlled eastern Aleppo, and these kids made the most of it. In the lull, ambulance drivers had time for tea. There were even empty hospital beds. We had to change blood-stained sheets 1,000 times a day, said this Aleppo paramedic. Today, we've only seen patients with flu. If the ceasefire continues to hold for the next 7 days, the U.S. and Russia will start coordinating airstrikes against jihadist groups, including ISIS. And crucially, the Syrian Air Force will be barred from flying in rebel-held areas. But one man's rebel is another's freedom fighter. And Russia and the U.S. have not seen eye to eye on which opposition groups are legitimate targets. There is plenty of scope yet for this deal to come unstuck. To underscore the problem, Scott, the United Nations massive aid convoys are all packed up and ready to roll, but they can't move because the UN is still negotiating their safe passage with the Syrian government and a dizzying number of armed opposition groups.
Elizabeth Palmer inside Syria for us tonight. Liz, thank you.
The United States flew nuclear-capable B-1B bombers over South Korea Tuesday in a response to North Korea's recent nuclear test. Meanwhile, in Seoul, U.S. and South Korean diplomats strategized over what measures to take against North Korea, with more sanctions topping the agenda.
Our intention, and this is shared by the Republic of Korea, is to secure the strongest possible resolution that includes new sanctions as quickly as possible.
Many suggest U.S. regional policy is in fact aimed at containing China, with North Korea providing the U.S. with an excuse to deploy more weapons to the region. This comes as Beijing blames Washington for escalating the North Korea problem.
The biggest reason North Korea develops nukes and missiles is the hostile policies of the United States. There is a lot of talk about carrots and sticks, but the U.S. is still not ready to talk with North Korea, because the sanctions and pressure is more beneficial to the U.S. than talking.
Russia has also called on the U.S. to be creative rather than rely on threatening activity and sanctions. The United States seems to have turned a deaf ear to criticisms of its policies toward North Korea, considering more sanctions, although that strategy has so far failed. While there needs to be a change in direction to calm the situation, more U.S.-South Korean naval drills approach, which only ratchets up tension on the Korean peninsula. Frank Smith, Press TV, Seoul.
Well, to discuss that further, we're now joined with Mr. Stephen Kelly, who is a political commentator, and he's joining us live now via Skype from Los Angeles. Mr. Kelly, 5 such attacks in just over a week by Israel. What's its game plan?
Well, I think Israel has a very big problem with confusing Syria with Israel. The report of mortar fire landing within Israel, I don't see Syrian troops accidentally bombing Israel. I think that they're fighting ISIS within Syrian territory. But if you look at what's happening, I think that Israel's grip on the Golan Heights seems to be slipping, and I think it's only a matter of time, perhaps after Aleppo is freed, that they can focus their attention a little more on the Golan.
So in a sense, do you think, Mr. Kelly, that Israel is looking to spoil also any ceasefire that may succeed or not in Syria?
They're certainly provoking, and this this increase in the bombings in the Golan, as well as they're actually tearing down homes, starting to demolish homes in the Golan as if it was occupied territory, like they do so much in the West Bank and what have you. And we're seeing these massive uprisings now by the Druze complaining about Israel's support of the barbaric Daesh. So clearly things seem to be turning against Israel with respect to the Golan.
Indeed, and then obviously we have all those foreign players in Syria as well. I wonder how many of them do you think are cooperating with the Israelis when it comes to their individual interests there?
Well, you know, if we're talking about the so-called moderate opposition as well as the ISIS, then certainly the Golan is an important staging area and a logistical support beacon, as well as a place they would like to be when they're taken for medical support. But as far as the Russians and the Americans and the British and the Europeans and those various entities, obviously they're there only for the support of Israel. And I think that as much activity and havoc they raised in other areas of the country, I think they're trying to distract the world from the real issue, which is this continued occupation of Golan, which always should have been an issue. But somehow I believe Israel thinks people will never notice that the Golan is actually Syrian territory.
Very well. We'll leave it there at that point. But of course, as always, Mr. Kelly, we appreciate it.